The tree on both sides of the river of life. There is a passage near the very end of Revelation about the tree of life that my mind doesn't want to leave. It is one of those strange little details that most of us read right past because we assume we understand what we're looking at. John says that he was shown a pure river of the water of life, proceeding out from the throne of God and of the Lamb. Then he says something curious. He describes the tree of life as being on both sides of the river. Now maybe this is something we never stop to think about, because I don't know about you, but the last time I checked, trees generally occupy one location at a time. And yet here is John describing a single tree of life that somehow exists on both sides of the pure river, which even brings up another detail in this passage that becomes even more fascinating when you connect it to the river itself. John doesn't just see a river of life flowing from the throne of God. He calls it a pure river. The Greek word is katharos, pure, unmixed, uncorrupted. And then, almost immediately, he describes the tree of life as being on both sides of that river. I've often wondered if those two images belong together more than we realize. Because a river divides things, one side and another side, here and there, this bank and that bank. Yet somehow the tree of life appears on both sides of the very thing that normally separates them, and the river it spans is not muddy, obstructed, or confused. It is pure, unmixed, flowing directly from the throne. It's almost as though John is being shown a reality where the very life flowing from God is overcoming the separations that once defined the world. Those separations that we inherited and now tend to call time and space. I've pondered on this idea quite a bit in past videos. The river flows from the throne, the tree bridges both sides. It almost hints at a dimensional portal, if one wanted to get really wild with conjecture. I must add that the more that I study these kinds of things and compare them to the world developing around us, the less wild these kinds of things seem to be. But the image continues. The nations are healed, the curse is removed. One image after another seems to move in the same most glorious direction, toward reconciliation, toward wholeness, toward a world with fewer barriers, fewer distortions, and less separation between the source, known as our Creator, and his people that receive from him. We don't know exactly what John saw, but I find it fascinating that he places a pure river and a tree that somehow stands on both sides of it in the very same picture. As though life itself is no longer confined by the boundaries that once divided everything into one side or the other. That is a most profound thing for our little human minds to try to fathom, and perhaps that is fitting for the closing vision of Revelation. Because by this point in the story, or in his story, heaven and earth are no longer estranged. God dwells more directly with humanity. The curse is gone, the healing of the nations has begun. Everywhere you look, old divisions seem to be giving way to a deeper coherence. The tree standing on both sides of the river may be one more glimpse of that reality, a reality where the fractures that once defined our experience no longer have the final word. But maybe most commentators and biblical scholars try to solve this seeming logical problem too quickly. They simply suggest there are many trees. Fair enough. Maybe. To me, though, many trees sound logically different than a single tree. So I can't help but wonder if we are doing the same thing here that people have done throughout history when confronted with prophetic language. We encounter something that doesn't fit neatly into our existing framework, and rather than allowing the strangeness to challenge our assumptions, we immediately force it back into categories that we already understand. And what if that tendency is one of the very things Revelation is warning us about? Because the more I have studied prophecy, the more I have become convinced that one of the great mistakes of modern eschatology is assuming that because we recognize or know the words, we therefore know the reality that they are describing. The Pharisees made that mistake. They knew the prophecies, they knew the language, they knew the expectations, and yet when the fulfillment stood right in front of them, they couldn't see it. Not because the prophecies failed, but because their expectations had become stronger than their ability to perceive. And I sometimes wonder if we are vulnerable to the very same thing, especially when we come to the end of Revelation, because when John received these visions, he saw them all at once. He saw a completed story, a compressed story, a beginning and an end held together in a single revelation. But humanity experiences these things very differently. We experience them slowly. We experience them as history. We experience them through unfolding events, overlapping fulfillments, layered meanings and realities that often become clear only after they have already begun to emerge. Which brings me back to that tree. Because what if the logical problem is not that John saw a strange tree? What if the problem with our way of thinking is that we are trying to force a reality beyond our current experience into the limitations of our present categories? Towards the end of the revelation, something fascinating keeps happening. Boundaries begin collapsing, not into confusion, but into coherence. The throne and the city become intertwined. The city and the bride become intertwined. God dwells with humanity. Heaven and earth come together. The river flows directly from the throne itself. Everything begins moving toward union rather than separation. And in the middle of all of that stands a tree that seems to exist on both sides of a river at once. Perhaps the point isn't geography. Perhaps the point is participation. Perhaps John is being shown a reality where life is no longer confined, no longer restricted, no longer hidden behind cherubim and a flaming sword. A reality where the very thing, humanity, lost in Genesis, has become fully accessible once again. And then another thought struck me. What if the dimensional awkwardness of that image is intentional? What if John is seeing something that makes perfect sense from inside the reality itself, but appears strange to us from our current dimensionally limited perspective? After all, Revelation is filled with unfathomable images like that. A city that is also a bride, a lamb that is also a king, a throne that is also a source, a reality that has no darkness, images that refuse to stay inside our neat categories. Could that be why those conflicting seeming images were given, not merely to inform us, but to stretch us, to stretch our ideas about our reality, to prepare us for realities we cannot yet fully comprehend? Because even the language itself begins doing this. I've gone over this in past videos, but to re-emphasize, John says he saw, but the Greek word can mean more than visual sight. It can mean to perceive, to understand, to become aware. He speaks of a new heaven and a new earth, but the word doesn't necessarily mean newly created. It can mean renewed, transformed, fresh in quality. He speaks of heaven and earth, and yet those words themselves possess broader meanings than the images most of us automatically attach to them. So perhaps the final chapters of Revelation are not merely describing replacement. Are they describing unveiling? Are they describing realities becoming what they were always intended to be? And maybe that is why the tree appears on both sides of the river. Not because John was confused or because the vision was sloppy, but because he was attempting to communicate a reality where some of the dimensional separations we take for granted have begun to disappear. A reality where distance and light no longer functions the same way, where life flows freely from the throne, where heaven and earth are no longer estranged, where humanity finally participates in the fullness of divine life. And maybe the most fascinating part of all is that John never stopped to explain the tree. He doesn't seem puzzled by it. He simply describes what he sees and moves on, almost as if once he was standing within that reality, the image made perfect sense. Maybe that's the lesson. Maybe some of these things are not fully understood before they arrive. Maybe they become clear only in their fruition. So, if that's the case, then maybe the question is not whether we can completely explain every symbol today. Could the question be whether we are willing to let go of our assumptions long enough to recognize fulfillment when it finally stands before us? Because history suggests to us that God often fulfills his promises in ways that are perfectly faithful to his words, while remaining completely unexpected by those who thought that they already understood them. In my view, anyways, that is all. Something well worth pondering.